The moment his mother, Margaret Preston, uttered the words, they hung in the air of her perfectly manicured garden like a poisoned dart. "It's important, Alara dear," she'd said, her smile as thin and sharp as a shard of glass, "for everyone to know their place." She was talking about her seating chart for an upcoming dinner party, but we both knew she was talking about my life. I was the girl from the wrong side of the city, the girl with dirt under her fingernails, the girl who was hopelessly out of her depth in their world of inherited luxury. But as I looked at her, standing in front of the grand stone manor she believed was the unshakable foundation of her dynasty, I had to suppress a smile. Because she had no idea that my father, the man she'd never heard of, was about to teach her the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, knowing your place means knowing your landlord. Before I tell you what happened when the eviction notice arrived at the party of the century, make sure you hit that subscribe button because this story is about to take turns you never saw coming. They thought they were the kings and queens of their castle, but they never thought to ask who owned the land. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Alara, and for 2 years, I tried to build a home with a man who was too afraid to stand up to the dragon at the gate. I was about to learn that the only home worth having is the one you build yourself. Our story began in the one place the Prestons would never willingly set foot, a muddy, neglected patch of urban wasteland. I was a landscape architect, presenting my pro bono design for a new public park to a skeptical city council. I was fighting for green space, for community, for a small patch of beauty in a world of concrete. He was Julian Preston, heir to the Preston & Sons luxury goods empire, and he was there as part of a PR-mandated community outreach program. He should have been bored to tears. Instead, he was captivated. After I'd won over the council with schematics and heartfelt pleas, he approached me, his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the mud. "I've never heard anyone talk about soil composition with that much passion," he said, a genuine, unguarded smile on his face. "You made me see this place not as a liability, but as a possibility." Julian wasn't like the other wealthy men I'd encountered. He seemed untainted by the casual arrogance of his class. He asked to see my other projects, and we spent our first dates walking through community gardens in the Bronx and rooftop farms in Brooklyn. He was fascinated by my world, a world where value was measured in growth and sustainability, not in carats and thread counts. For a year, he was my refuge, a kind soul in a harsh world. He loved my independence, my grit, the fact that I had built my own small but respected firm from the ground up. When he proposed to me under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree in a park I had designed myself, I believed our love was strong enough to bridge the chasm between our two worlds. I just hadn't realized that he expected me to do all the building. The first time I met Margaret Preston, I understood the true nature of that chasm. The family estate on the North Shore was less a home and more a monument to oppressive good taste. It was a world of hushed tones, polished silver, and unspoken rules. Margaret, the family matriarch, greeted me at the door. She was tall and impeccably dressed, with eyes that scanned me from head to toe in a single dismissive sweep. "So you're Alara," she said, her voice cool and smooth. "Julian has told us so much about your work." We sat down to a lunch that felt more like an interrogation. "Julian tells me you're a gardener," she began, deliberately using the most diminutive term for my profession. "It must be so satisfying to work with your hands." I smiled politely. "I'm a landscape architect, actually. My firm specializes in urban ecological design." Her eyes glazed over. "How fascinating. Julian's father and I believe that one's environment is so important. That's why we've always lived here. There's a certain standard one becomes accustomed to." The conversation continued in this vein, a masterclass in veiled condescension. She asked about my family, and when I told her I was raised by a single mother in Queens and didn't know my father, I saw a look of quiet confirmation in her eyes. I was precisely who she had pegged me for. A girl from nothing, a temporary amusement for her son. Julian sat beside me, a knot of tension in his jaw. He would occasionally interject with a weak, "Mom, Alara is very successful," but his voice was thin, apologetic. He was a boy at his mother's table, not the man I knew. In the car on the way home, the silence was heavy. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered, staring out at the passing mansions. She can be a lot. She's from a different world." I wanted to scream, "We're all from the same world, Julian. Some people just build higher walls." But I loved him, and I believed that his love for me would eventually teach him how to tear them down. That lunch was the opening salvo in a year-long war of attrition against my spirit. I was the unpolished stone in their perfectly curated collection, and Margaret Preston was determined to either polish me into submission or cast me out. The insults were never direct, always couched in the language of concern or misplaced politeness. At a family brunch, she'd look at my simple, elegant dress and remark, "Oh, Alara, that's a lovely color on you. It's so wonderful that you don't feel the need to follow trends." When I announced my firm had won a prestigious design award, she'd smiled thinly and said, "How wonderful for you. It's so important to have little accomplishments to call your own." Her favorite weapon was comparing me to Julian's ex-girlfriend, a woman from a family of equal social standing. "Camilla understood the pressures of a family like ours," she would sigh dramatically over dessert. "She knew that maintaining a certain standard isn't snobbery, it's a responsibility." Each comment was designed to reinforce one central message: you do not belong here. Know your place. And through it all, Julian remained my loving, devoted, and utterly useless partner. In private, he was my champion. He would hold me as I cried, telling me how much he loved me, how his mother's opinions meant nothing, how we would build our own life. But in public, in the cold shadow of his mother's disapproval, he would vanish. He would become a silent, anxious bystander, his face a mask of pained neutrality. His apologies became a ritual. "I'll talk to her," he'd promise after a particularly brutal dinner. But he never did. He couldn't. He was a man drowning in filial duty, and he was using my dignity as a life raft. I was losing myself, sanding down my own edges, silencing my own opinions, all in a desperate attempt to make myself small enough to fit into his world. I was beginning to forget the woman who had stood up to city council, the woman who could make a garden grow from concrete. I was becoming the person Margaret Preston wanted me to be: quiet, accommodating, and defeated. Here is the secret that I held close to my chest, a quiet flame in the gathering storm. My father was Alistair Vance. To the Prestons, the name would have meant nothing. Alistair had cultivated anonymity with the same meticulous care with which he cultivated his empire. He was a real estate mogul, but not in the flashy, gold-plated tower sense. He was a ghost who owned half the city's foundations. He bought land, entire city blocks, through layers of shell corporations and holding companies, and then he would sit on it for decades, a silent landlord to the city's most powerful players. My mother, a brilliant and fiercely independent artist, had fallen in love with him. But she couldn't stand his world. They separated when I was young, and I chose to live with her, in her world of passion and creativity, not his world of ledgers and deeds. Our estrangement wasn't born of anger, but of principle. I wanted to build my own life, to be known for the gardens I grew, not the ground my father owned. He respected that. We spoke only a few times a year, our conversations brief but filled with a deep, unspoken understanding. He was the quiet, invisible foundation of my life, a source of strength I knew I could call upon, but had been determined never to use. I didn't want the Preston family's money. I had access to a fortune that would make their Gilded Age inheritance look like pocket change. But I didn't want to win their approval with my father's checkbook. I wanted to win it with my character. I wanted them to look at Alara, the girl from Queens who loved plants, and see her intrinsic worth. It was a test, a private hypothesis. Could people who valued lineage above all else recognize true value when it stood right in front of them, unadorned by a famous name? For 2 years, they provided me with a clear and resounding answer. No. The breaking point when it came was not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, public execution of my spirit. The Prestons were planning the 50th anniversary gala for their company, Preston & Sons Luxury Goods. It was to be held at their flagship store on Fifth Avenue, a building they referred to as the Preston Building, the jewel in their corporate crown. The event was Margaret's magnum opus, a chance to solidify their family's legacy for another half-century. I, of course, was expected to be a silent, smiling accessory. At a final planning dinner held at their estate, Margaret was in her element, directing a storm of caterers, florists, and planners. The centerpiece of the gala's design was to be a massive floral installation in the store's grand entrance. As a landscape architect, I saw a flaw in their plan, a drainage issue that would ruin the store's marble floors. I waited for a pause in the conversation and offered a gentle suggestion. "Margaret," I began, "I was just looking at the plans for the installation. If you use that type of planter, you might have a problem with water seepage. Perhaps you could use a sealed basin system instead? I can draw up a quick schematic." Margaret stopped, a champagne flute halfway to her lips. She looked at me, then at the assembled group of high society planners, and let out a small, condescending laugh. The whole table turned to stare. "Oh, Alara, darling," she said, her voice laced with amusement. "That's very sweet of you to be concerned with our little plumbing issues. But I think we'll leave the important things to the professionals." She turned to the head event planner. "Don't you worry, we have everything under control." Then she looked back at me, her eyes glinting. "You just focus on finding a suitable dress. It's so important for everyone to know their place at these events, don't you think?" The room was silent. Every eye was on me. I looked at Julian, my fiancé, my partner, my love. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on his plate. He said nothing, not a word. His silence was a roar. It was a definitive statement. He would always choose his mother. He would always choose the path of least resistance. He would always ask me to sacrifice my dignity for his comfort. In that moment, the love I had for him, which had been dying a slow death for months, finally flatlined. It was over. A cold, serene calm washed over me. I was done fighting for a man who would not fight for me. I was done trying to belong in a place I didn't respect. I smiled back at Margaret, a slow, genuine smile. "You're absolutely right, Margaret," I said softly. "It is important to know one's place." That night I went home and packed a small bag. Then I made a phone call. The phone rang 3 times before a quiet, familiar voice answered. "Alara," he said. It wasn't a question. "Dad?" I replied, my voice steady. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to check the deed on a building on Fifth Avenue." I gave him the address. The plan was born from 2 years of quiet humiliation and a lifetime of inherited strategic thinking. I played my part beautifully for the next 2 weeks. I was the picture of compliance. I attended my dress fittings. I smiled and nodded at family dinners. I let Margaret believe she had finally, definitively, won. She had put me in my place, and I had, it seemed, accepted my lot as the quiet, decorative fiancé. Julian was relieved by my sudden change in demeanor. He saw it as acceptance, as a sign that I was finally willing to play by his family's rules. He mistook my strategic retreat for surrender. The night of the 50th anniversary gala was a spectacle of Prestonian self-congratulation. The Fifth Avenue store was transformed, dripping with crystals and white orchids. Hundreds of New York's elite mingled, sipping champagne and paying tribute to the Preston dynasty. I stood by Julian's side, a perfect picture of quiet elegance, my smile serene, my posture relaxed. Margaret was holding court near the entrance, radiant and triumphant. She had never been happier. She had her legacy, her perfect son, and his perfectly tamed fiancé. Everything was exactly as it should be. The climax of the evening was Margaret's speech. She took the stage to thunderous applause, a queen addressing her loyal subjects. She spoke of the Preston legacy, of their commitment to quality and tradition. She spoke of her grandfather, who had opened their first small shop, and her father, who had built it into an empire. "And for 20 years," she said, her voice swelling with pride as she gestured around the magnificent space. "This building, our home on Fifth Avenue, has been the heart of that empire. It is a symbol of our permanence, our history, our place in the very fabric of this city. We are so proud to call it ours." As the applause swelled again, a man in a crisp, dark suit walked onto the stage. He was not on the program. He approached Margaret and handed her a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with a simple, elegant V. Confused, she took it. The man leaned into the microphone. "Mrs. Margaret Preston," he said, his voice calm and professional. "You have just been served." A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. "This document," the man continued, "is a formal notice to vacate these premises within 30 days. Your commercial lease, which expires at midnight tonight, will not be renewed." The confusion in the room sharpened into shock. Margaret stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. "What is this?" she demanded. "This is the Preston Building. We have been here for 20 years. "Indeed," said a new voice. A man was walking calmly through the parted crowd, heading towards the stage. He was older, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored gray suit. He moved with an unhurried grace that commanded attention. It was my father, Alistair Vance. He stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. "You have been my tenants for 20 years, he said, his voice quiet but echoing in the stunned silence. "And I have decided it is time for a change." Margaret stared at him, her face a mask of utter bewilderment. "You?" she whispered. "Who are you?" Alistair Vance looked out at the sea of famous faces, then his eyes landed on Margaret. "My name is Alistair Vance," he said. "I am the owner of this building, and I am her father." He turned and looked directly at me, a proud, powerful smile gracing his lips for the first time. The room erupted. It was not a murmur this time. It was a roar of shock, of gossip, of dawning comprehension. Every camera phone in the room was pointed at the stage. Julian looked as if he had been turned to stone, his face a horrifying tableau of disbelief and regret. Margaret simply shook her head, unable to process the reality that had just dismantled her entire world. The woman she had spent 2 years trying to put in her place was the daughter of the man who owned her palace. My father wasn't finished. "Mrs. Preston," he said, his voice now holding a note of cold steel. "You were right about one thing. It is very important to know one's place. And your place, it seems, is no longer here." He set the microphone down. In the ensuing chaos, he walked over to me, took my arm, and quietly escorted me out of the building, leaving the smoldering ruins of the Preston dynasty behind us. The aftermath was swift and total. The story of the Prestons' public humiliation was on the front page of every society and business journal within days. Being evicted from their own flagship store on the night of their 50th anniversary gala was an unrecoverable blow. Their brand, built on an image of old money permanence and stability, was shattered. Key investors pulled out. Their stock plummeted. The Preston building was shuttered, its grand windows papered over, a tombstone marking the grave of a fallen empire. They were forced to sell off assets to cover their debts, downsizing from their Long Island estate to a condo in Florida. They had lost everything, not because of a hostile takeover, but because of their own blind prejudice. Julian tried to contact me, of course. There were dozens of texts, rambling voicemails, letters sent to my office. He was sorry. He was a fool. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. I never responded. His regret was a currency I no longer accepted. He was a coward, and his tragedy was that he only found his courage after it was too late to matter. My life, however, had just begun. 6 months later, I stood on the polished marble floor of the now empty Preston building. My father had handed the entire property over to a foundation in my name. We were turning it into the city's largest public conservatory and a center for landscape architecture studies, the Alara Vance Conservatory. It was no longer a temple to overpriced handbags. It was a living, breathing testament to growth. My father and I stood there, looking out at the city. "They never understood," he said quietly. "They thought power was about putting your name on a building. Real power is owning the ground it stands on." They had told me to know my place, and I did. My place was not in their world of shrinking violets and inherited arrogance. My place was here, in the heart of the city, turning a monument to vanity into a garden for the people. If this story inspired you, if you believe that a person's worth is something they build, not something they're given, then smash that like button and subscribe for more stories of empowerment and sweet, sweet karma. Don't let anyone tell you what your place is. Your place is wherever you have the courage to stand. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you had to stand your ground and define your own place in the world. I read every single one. Until next time, remember that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building a world so beautiful that they can no longer afford the rent.